Welcome to another episode of Health Creators. This is Liv, and joining me here today is Mike Romanos, Imperial College London's Associate Dean for Enterprise and former founder of 3 Biotech Spinouts. So, Mike, can you tell us about your journey co-founding and building 3 Biotech Spinouts and then becoming the Associate Dean for Enterprise?
You know, Liv, as I think about that question, it makes me think more deeply, and it reminds me that the journey actually started with my first chemistry set age 7, when I developed a passion for science. And that continued, and I always wanted to be in biotech, but that didn't happen till later. So most recently, I founded 3 biotechs, and the latest one has been Microbiotica, a microbiome precision medicine spinout out of the Sanger Institute, founded with 2 colleagues, one of them an old colleague from my time in my first job at Wellcome Biotech. Mm-hmm. And I built and ran that for 6 years, and that's after the 1.5 years I took to spin it out. We had tremendous success with an early landmark deal with Genentech in the first 18 months, and most recently also with Merck. And last year I raised £50 million to go into the clinic. And after that, I felt that I could move on and go back to Imperial College. So prior to that, my other companies were Crescendo Biologics, which I started when I left GSK. In early 2009, another platform company, this time antibody transgenics for fragments and multi-specific antibody fragments, from one of the key inventors in the field, Mariana Brueggemann at the Babram Institute. And again, I built and ran it for 6 years, built a remarkable platform, and then passed it on and moved on, and that has a pipeline in oncology now with several assets in the clinic. One that was licensed for psoriasis to Zai Labs in China and has had a very successful phase 1B in patients, and it could be transformational for psoriasis. So that's a great pleasure that in that case, I built the platform, chose the target, and it's gone to almost a POC already. The third company I founded was NKIO. And actually it was from when I was advising at Imperial College, after I left Crescendo and started spinning out Microbiotica, I was advising there, and I came across this remarkable technology, and I eventually spun it out, actually in my spare time in 2020, as I was beginning the fundraise for Microbiotica. And I think it's a remarkable platform technology for NK cell therapy, which is a hot area. It's a newer, younger company, but I'm very excited about it. So before these companies, I was at GSK. In fact, I started in Wellcome Biotech, which was a biotech company that eventually got wrapped into GSK, working on genetic engineering and novel vaccines. And over time, in Wellcome, Glaxo Wellcome, and GSK as it went through mergers, I was running bigger and bigger organizations and actually building them too. And they were always to do with platforms, molecular platforms, or genomics, or therapeutic discovery platforms. Eventually, I built and ran an organization called Discovery Technology, which was 300 people on 6 sites in 3 countries. We had all the genomic and functional genomic technologies, and were delivering data packages for new targets, new biomarkers, and for new clinical candidates. And in my time at GSK, I was involved in many other things like antivirals, monoclonal antibodies, really a number of areas sequentially with assets that went into the clinic. At that time too, I also became very heavily involved in IP strategy, and for example, in the GSK merger, I was co-leading the work group that defined the IP strategy for R&D in the combined company. So IP was very close to my heart. Now, more recently, over time, I got involved in other things, and I got involved as a trustee and non-exec director of LifeArc, the biomedical charity. And one really exciting thing that I did was to be on the team that monetized the royalties for Keytruda, which is a drug that LifeArc essentially created, and that it's Merck's biggest selling drug. And we sold the royalties to a Canadian pension fund for $1.3 billion.
Yeah.
And so that's come into LifeArc to enable it to be a really leading player in translation. So there's translation again. It's definitely a theme because I've worked at the interface between science and companies with LifeArc as well. So that's taken me to the present time to Imperial College.
And in these three companies you mentioned, so they were all platform technologies, and that kind of serves as a common thread. Why did you focus on platform technologies?
Well, when going back a long way, when I went to university, I wanted to be a chemist, but I got a little bit bored of it and saw that molecular biology was happening. And so after I left Cambridge, I did a PhD in molecular biology at Imperial College. And that's what I wanted to do. It was just so exciting. And it had the hard science angle to it, but with biology. But then it was also happening with companies and deals and things. And it's natural that when you work in molecular biology that you're interested in platforms, because the new modalities are essentially platforms for drugs that depend on molecular biology rather than chemistry. But having said that, I've also been heavily involved in small molecule drug development. But that's really my interest in platforms. It started right from the beginning. And I got a chance to work on maybe a dozen of them in my career.
And then when we talk about how you founded these three companies and took them to such success, I wonder if you could, shed some light on how one might actually found and, start a biotech spinout.
Firstly, I've been around a while, and I did this in one particular way. I went into deep science. I understood what there was in the science, and I built on that, and I built quite deep science companies. But there are lots of ways to do it. And when I get asked by people at the beginning of their career who want to leave straight from a PhD to build a company, which is something I wouldn't have done. I needed all that experience first. I'm not going to tell them don't do it that way, because I think things are changing and there are more ways to do this now. So the way I did it required having a really good experience and judgment of science, so that when I spotted the opportunities, I thought this could be it. But at the same time, there's other factors involved in picking those opportunities. The academic founder is key. And do you trust this science? And is it a personality you can trust and work with? That is absolutely key. I mean, in my experience, particularly in my first industry experience, I learned about managing people and found out that I was good at it. And I didn't expect it because I had no interest before, but I was good at it. And I found that I had a strength in designing scientific strategies and designing teams to actually deliver those. So what was your question again? What advice would be to start companies? I think there are so many ways now. But my way has been to find really exciting science and to be sure that it's exciting, to be sure that it's got good patent cover, that other people also think it's exciting, and that you have a colleague in academia that you can work with. That's, for me, has been key.
And what's the number one thing to do if you are, CEO of a biotech company?
Well, the first thing is it actually takes a while to get there. And when I founded my companies, I was a bit like an entrepreneur in residence for two of them, especially Microbiotica, where they had something interesting, but were not getting traction with investments. So I went in unpaid, but I was doing other things. So I was doing a number of things, but I spent time for over a year, maybe a year and a half at the Sanger Institute, understanding the science, getting some patents filed, getting a business plan together, and then getting interest from investors. So, and then and then negotiating the license agreement with the Sanger Institute, which wasn't easy. And it wasn't easy for Imperial College either. They were both very difficult. So then you're in the middle of, you're a key stakeholder in the middle of, the investors, the academic institution, the academic, etc. So I'm not answering your question because that's before you've got the biotech.
Yeah.
And then you've got the biotech, you've spun out, and the people in the academic institution who, you've just been through a marathon with them, they think, great, it's done.
Yeah.
But it's not. That's the beginning of all the challenges.
Yeah.
You've got to build a top-performing operational team. You've got to get the board working well. You've got to get space. You've got to get, in particular, certain key people you can rely on, like in finance and operations. You've got to start delivering to your business plan for the first milestone so you get your next tranche of money, which could be coming up in a year.
Yeah.
And then, the other thing that can happen, and we did for Microbiotica, is you might want to consider adapting your business plan because you probably wrote it a while before. It took a long time to spin out. And it might need adapting, and you might need to adapt it in the short term and the long term. So those are all the things you need. But as soon as the company's formed, you've got to start delivering and making it work, while at the same time thinking about, is it still the right plan? Are the patents good? Do we need to work on them? There's 101 things. And for someone who's managed 300 people to then be managing initially 2, you're thrown right into managing much more yourself.
Yeah.
And for the investors, that's a risk when they get someone from big pharma who's managed big organizations. They wonder, can they still do that? Well, I could, and I quite enjoyed it, but it was a bit of a shock to begin.
Yeah, because I guess in a big corporate company, a lot of the processes, documentation, all of these things have already been done for you, and you kind of are just like, hey, give me this thing, right?
Well, you don't have to fundraise. You do have to sell what you're doing so you keep getting the money. So you do have that selling element. You do have the management. But yeah, you're right. Many of these things you have an organization in place, essentially. Although with the organizations I ran, I usually started off by building them, even to the international scale. But still, I was able to use the resources in GSK to get top people and build those very effective organizations quickly. And that was a massive learning, and it's phenomenal training. And it's a shame there's less of it now because there are fewer pharma companies, especially in the UK.
I see. And then what do you think is the number one thing not to do as a biotech CEO? And can you give an example of, when this happened to you and how you learned from it?
Oh my goodness. Well, I think there are learnings. I wouldn't say not to do, but let me give you some of the learnings I've had. So with my first company, Crescendo Biologics, I came into it after the investor had decided to invest in it. So it was a slightly different start, but essentially I built the business plan, I got more money, and I built the whole team. So I built the company. But the investment syndicate for that, of 4 investors, had 3 seed investors who would never have the funds to continue to the next round of financing. Only 1 could. The result is that a few years later, when we needed to raise 20 million, I had to rebuild the syndicate and bring in new investors. And it can be harder at that moment because there's more ability to believe the vision at the beginning than a few years in when they're looking for the hard data. As it happened also, when I rebuilt that syndicate in 2013 and raised 20 million, it was a tough time to raise money. And in that sector of antibody fragments, most of the companies were ahead of us. We thought we had the best technology, but a lot of the investors had placed their bets in the other companies already. So whatever they thought of us, they were not gonna, many of them not going to invest in us. So that's the dilemma if you don't have the full firepower of investors at the outset. The other learning from that one is that, well, we didn't have an academic founder available to us, and I had to find ways to build a platform because it wasn't built at all. By hook or by crook, working with whatever academic groups around the world I could find. And I kept the investors informed of how long that would take, and we delivered on time, but there was investor fatigue for how long it took that to build that platform. So those were two key learnings from that one. In contrast with Microbiotica, I had two strong investors, IP Group and Cambridge Innovation Capital, and more who wanted to come in, and they came in a bit later. And then a really well-known academic in the field from the Sanger Institute, and another founder who was my colleague from old days in Wellcome Biotech, who brought us together, who was very well known in the field. He got the Albert Sabin Gold Medal in vaccines in 2020. And having that reputation, scientific reputation behind you was incredibly important and valuable. There were other things, the platform from the Sanger wasn't ready. We had to adapt the business plan because it got outdated by the time we got to form the company. I think, what must you not do? I think that the things I felt I had control of, I don't think I recognized an actual mistake because I sweated over them for so long. The biggest one is your first 3 hires. If you get that wrong, one of those key hires wrong, they will not then be able to hire the people of the quality that you want. The quality of your whole company is dependent on the first people. Now that I understood from creating organizations during the mergers at GSK. I always created top quality organizations. I had the choice to pick my people, and I held out for very high standards because I knew the standards of your leaders reporting to you determined the quality of the entire organization. That is an enormously important decision, and I've never taken it lightly. And many other CEOs have said the same thing. I can't think out and out of any real mistakes that I've learned to not do. I agreed to do a very major collaboration with Genentech 9 months into Microbiotica, which was an enormous risk for a company with big ambitions, that it might get swallowed up and distracted. But we couldn't turn down a landmark collaboration with Genentech, which was signed in the 18th month. So I wouldn't say it was a mistake, and it galvanized us, but it brought a lot of challenge. Our platform wasn't really up to it when we signed, but we got it up to it in time to deliver.
Why do you think it's so difficult for academics today to spin out companies?
I think a spin out is a very difficult thing to do unless everything is perfect. And I think often experienced CEOs don't want to do that early stage. Because if they can go to a later stage when these messy problems with does the technology work, is the team okay, have you reached escape velocity that people will support you enough that you can build up a team and therefore raise the next finance and get to the clinic. Those are messy early stages, and it would be easier to come in and take leadership of a company that is just about to go in the clinic and you play it out. And if it plays out well, you make a bomb. But, those are plum opportunities, and they go to very experienced people. And because of where I'm coming from, I've always been very excited by the early science and got into that. And it's messy and difficult. It's not just difficult for the academics, it's difficult for everybody. It's difficult for investors to identify those opportunities, but then they have choice. So if they go to good institutions, it's more difficult to make a bad bet, and it's quite difficult to know all the risks when they make their decision. For an academic, they've got to decide. I mean, with Trevor Lawley, he had to decide, will he hitch up with me as his entrepreneur? Because once we're like that, we're committed to each other. And that is a very important decision. He had to trust my judgment on which science to do, which not to do, what patents to file, because coming in early, I was helping him actually even with science strategy that leads to commercialization. And that is the difficult thing. The big barriers are, do they have an invention which is applicable? And is there a need for it? And another big one is, have they done enough to show that it works? Because there's a funding gap. And this is a critical deficiency in the whole system, which everyone is trying to address. And we're trying to do this at Imperial College now. It's one of the key things I'm involved with. How can you fund that last bit of work that will make this really fundable as a startup and actually lead to a higher valuation as well?
But let's talk about the funding, right?
Yeah.
Because in the UK, a lot of academic institutions take equity within these spinouts. And if you end up with a bad deal and the institution takes too much equity, then you become pretty unfundable, right, in the later stages, because investors know there's going to be 10 rounds down the line. So if the university is taking a high equity percentage, it does disincentivize people from spinning out.
Well, I think there are two separate things here. One is when you get to that point where you have all the IP that you want to license, and you've negotiated license terms, and nowadays those include royalties and milestones. It used to be just equity, but nowadays it's like that. So it's quite a complex package. And from that package, usually the entrepreneur has, or if there isn't the entrepreneur, then it may be someone from the VCs, plays a central role in negotiating between the investors, the academic, and the institution on what is the pre-money valuation. So the investors say, right, we'll license all this, and we'll say it's worth £5 million. And we're going to put in 10 million. So then the value of the company immediately after investment is 15. And the institution gets a third of it. So that negotiation is a negotiation, and there's nothing fixed about it. It's just dependent on what they're prepared to pay. I think what's in the news at the moment is, of that third that goes to the academic institution, how much goes to the founders and how much stays with the academic institution. And it matters less to investors. The key thing for them is how much of a percentage are they getting. Now, they don't want to see the academic founders squashed and getting of the bit that, say, goes to Imperial College, only getting 50%, and that's how it was. But they don't care as much. I think the issue is, for academics, they're incentivized and measured by their publications. Why should they spend their time creating a spin-out? And their lives will be much harder.
Yeah.
If they're only going to get 50% of the value that goes to the college, and I think 50% is wrong, and it's very much in the news, but you know what? We've moved on from that. No academic institution takes 50% now. The average is probably, it's between, in a range of 10 to 30 already. And there's talk everywhere about reducing it to quite a low level. And I think many institutions are going to 20 or less. And we're doing that at Imperial College too. But that relates to the bit that the college retains, and it's less of an issue for the investors. I think it's an important question. But what's in the news is already quite substantially sorted out. However, the overall spin-out terms and the process of negotiating and everything has been very difficult. And all the universities have come together to try to design a process which is simpler, more standard, less greedy, and hopefully easier to do. But that's only one bottleneck. The other bottleneck is the science ready to spin out? Has there been enough funding? And everyone's trying to find money to do that little bit of extra work just beforehand. Is there an entrepreneur? And is there early stage investment? And has the IP package been good?
And I guess that brings us on to, your role currently at Imperial, which I find very interesting, because I don't really see 3-time successful entrepreneurs becoming, dean for enterprise in universities. Often it's, if you can't, you teach, right? But in this case, you obviously can.
Well,
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
I think it's a good thing when you've been through so much experience. And I've worked in charity with LifeArc, as a venture partner with investment, biotech, pharma.
Yeah.
And, I've done a lot of it. And so there's a question of how much more did I want to do?
Yeah.
And with Microbiotica in particular, I raised a lot of money and it was going to go to the clinic, but I reasoned that it probably would need another raise to have the next round of clinical trials. And was I wanting to do that too? It would be another long run at it. And I've now been doing that for a while. So you could say it's a final part of my career. When I go back, I have shares, I have pensions, and I'm just so motivated, having had a period where I advised Imperial College and talked to 70 PIs, and I saw the untapped potential in biosciences in that college, which is one of the world's top 6 universities.
Yeah.
It could be like an MIT. It could have more bioscience startups. And I think I can make the difference there, or help make the difference.
Yeah.
And so that motivates me and excites me a lot. And I love doing it. I love talking to the academics about their inventions, advising them on a personal level. It's quite similar to spinning out the 3 companies, because that's what I did.
Yeah. And now you get.
And so I've always been close to those kinds of people and able to bridge the science to the commercial. And now I can also do it at the strategic level by designing spin-out terms. We're talking about, whether we might set up a VC fund for the college, funding for that last bit of research. So to help the whole ecosystem and raise the game, it's very motivating.
And so what's the number one impact you want to leave on the world, with your current role at Imperial?
Well, I see all of that as part of a longer term impact, and part of an impact and legacy I really am very satisfied with is the people I've managed or mentored or given space to. So many of them. I've managed maybe 1,000. Many have surpassed what I've done and had wonderful careers. And that for me is a very great source of pleasure and satisfaction. And that network that I have and can call upon. In terms of the 3 companies, they're all going to play out in the clinic. And so they have the opportunity to turn new technologies into transformational medicines. Why I was so delighted with the Zylab's results with the Crescendo IL-17 molecule for psoriasis, a topical monoclonal antibody type for psoriasis, because that is playing out as a new drug which could be transformational. But Crescendo has other drugs in oncology. Microbiotica has some very important clinical studies which could be very important for patients. One of them in immuno-oncology, collaborating with Merck. They're going to play out in coming years. And NKIO2, with our first trials likely to be in ovarian cancer. So obviously, those are going to be very important as I see them play out. The technologies have, but it takes a while for the drugs. There are drugs from that I have impacted earlier at GSK, but they're in a bigger pot with many other contributors.
Yeah.
At Imperial College, I love doing the same thing, which is advising academics. It's very similar to what I've done starting companies, like an entrepreneur in residence, mentoring them, helping them to achieve the most from their science and getting involved in those discussions. It's a great source of pleasure. And I want to see more spin-outs, more commercialization. And I want to help change the ecosystem and just raise the game at Imperial College in biomedicine. And I think I have a fair shot at that with my role.